The quiet heart of the Barnwood Builders, steady, humble, and endlessly genuine. Johnny Jett has for years drawn viewers in with his craftsmanship and charm, turning forgotten wood into works of art. But behind that warm smile lies a story shaped by struggle, sacrifice, and survival. From his roots in rural Kentucky to his time serving in Vietnam, Johnny's life has been anything but easy. And just when it seemed he'd finally found peace doing what he loved most, a shocking rumor about his death sent fans into a frenzy. So who is the man behind the legend? And what really happened to Johnny Jett? Johnny and his older brother William Eugene Billy Jett were raised in a close-knit Methodist household where faith and family came first. As a child growing up in rural Kentucky, life was simple, yet full of adventure. Johnny loved being outdoors, and to this day, remembers one story from fourth grade how he and his friends would sneak away during recess to the creek nearby to fish or swim. It didn't take long for the principal to figure it out, and those innocent escapades earned them a few lectures on the way. He attended schools in Goddard and Flemingsburg, staying close to home. His older brother, Billy, would be the first to enlist in the U.S. Army, going to Vietnam. After seeing first-hand devastation from war, Billy implored their father to keep Johnny out of the military and steered him toward college instead. Following that, Johnny enrolled at Morehead State University following high school, but the experience did not go well. In retrospect, he admitted to having no idea what the professors were talking about, and he ended up failing nearly all his classes, with the one exception of arts and literature. That lone success told him something about himself. He had a creative streak. With that realization, he shifted gears and enrolled at Maysville Community College to take vocational classes in drafting. Upon graduation, he landed his first job in Ohio at the Cincinnati Milling Company. For 1 year, he was deeply involved with technical drawings and board sketching, perfecting his craft as a draftsman. But in 1969, plans took a surprising turn when the government drafted him into the Army. Johnny completed his 6-week basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, but instead of being shipped directly into combat, he was placed with an engineering unit. There he found himself back at the drafting board, utilizing many of the same skills he had learned in school. 2 years later, in 1971, he was sent to Vietnam. He never had to fire a weapon, but he often came under fire while moving from one location to another, and those experiences have definitely left their mark. When Johnny was serving overseas, he fell into a dark period. Recreational drugs were everywhere in Vietnam, making marijuana and heroin easy to find and hard to resist. For many soldiers, including Johnny, they became ways to cope with tedium and the crushing weight of fear and depression. When he returned home, his father offered him a job at the family's water company. Having grown up helping his dad, the work was familiar, and rebuilding his life was a good starting point. Back home in Kentucky, away from the free-flowing drugs, Johnny began to recover. He would say often that his faith helped him through that time, and though God may not have made him an addict, he could take that struggle and bring out something good from it. In time, Johnny started sharing his story publicly, speaking to rehabilitation programs and helping other people fight their own battles with addiction. Meanwhile, Billy had already begun his career in carpentry, working projects that involved dismantling and restoring old log cabins. His brother inspired Johnny to try building one for himself. He eventually found an old cabin he wanted to make his own, but it was still occupied by a brother and sister leasing it. Then fate stepped in when the sister passed away and the brother moved into a nursing home. The property owner called Johnny with an offer. The cabin was his if he'd tear it down and rebuild it elsewhere. Johnny and Billy took on the challenge together. They carefully tore down the old cabin, hand-moving each log back to their family farm, and then side by side, they rebuilt it from the ground up. The two brothers shared a love for old cabins and rustic barns. It wasn't just a pastime, it was something that bound them deeply. But in 1995, disaster struck when Billy passed away before completing his final project, a cabin he had been fashioning patiently, carefully, and proudly. Determined to see his brother's vision through, Johnny set out to finish what Billy started. To help him, he brought in his best friend, Sherman Thompson, who, like Billy, was a skilled carpenter. Together, they completed the cabin, And in the process, something much bigger started to take shape. Johnny enjoyed the work so much that he told his dad he was quitting his job to start a cabin business. Timing couldn't have been better. There was a growing demand for old log structures, and Johnny saw an opportunity to turn their shared passion into something real. From that point forward, Johnny and Sherman hit the open road, searching rural Kentucky high and low for historic 100-year-old cabins. They'd purchase them one at a time, carefully disassembling each structure and stacking the old logs neatly in what they called their boneyard. What started as a tribute to Billy slowly morphed into a full-fledged business. Before long, the two buddies became known as reliable purveyors of aged, authentic wood. And they didn't just sell materials, they offered full restoration services, rebuilding those cabins for people who wanted to own a piece of pioneer history. In 1996, fate stepped in again. Johnny was unwinding on his back porch, paintbrush in hand, when a man named Mark Bow showed up. Mark was from West Virginia, visiting his girlfriend at Morehead State University, and he was on the hunt for old cabins. Locals had told him about Johnny, who was the man to see if he wanted pioneer-era logs. Their first meeting has since become part of local legend. Mark introduced himself and said he was thinking about getting into the log cabin business. Johnny replied, without missing a beat, that he was thinking about getting out. Despite this inauspicious exchange, the two hit it off straight away. Sherman and Johnny knew the lay of the land. They helped Mark track down an astonishing number of cabins, around 100 by the end of that summer. Having moved some of those structures to his own boneyard in West Virginia, Mark was so impressed that Sherman asked if he'd consider hiring them full-time. Mark agreed, and in 1998 Johnny and Sherman officially joined his new company, Antique Cabins and Barns. Johnny had been operating machinery for years, dismantling cabins and rebuilding them from scratch, which made him one of the founding figures of the team. His craftsmanship and dedication helped the company gain traction across the region. That was setting the stage for something even bigger that would come years later. A turning point came in the form of a man hailing from New York executive Rick Kaplan of Silent Crow Productions. While on a skiing trip with his wife, Rick was passing through the area when he noticed the remarkable old cabins that were stacked in the boneyard. Curious, he stopped to chat with Johnny and Sherman, and soon afterwards met with Mark. He pitched an idea that would change everything, a documentary about their unique operation. In 2005, they filmed a 20-minute documentary that was screened at several festivals. The response was promising enough to inspire a pilot episode, which they shopped around to multiple television networks. Timing just wasn't right. The world of television then was top-heavy with shows like American Chopper, dominated by confrontational drama and angry, fiery on-screen tension. The quiet craftsmanship and teamwork behind these cabins didn't fit that mold, so the pilot tanked at least for the time being. A few years later, the crew was offered a reality show, but they said no almost immediately. The producers wanted drama, arguments, tension, and that sort of fake chaos that seemed to rule reality TV back then. But Mark Bow wasn't interested. His crew had worked side by side for years, building a kind of trust and friendship that ran a lot deeper than any business. As he said himself, he wasn't about to start yelling at his friends just to make good television. Then came a turning point. The DIY network approached them with a completely different vision. They didn't want fake fights or forced storylines, they wanted authenticity. They wanted to capture the crew exactly as they were, doing the hard, honest work of saving old barns and cabins. Once filming began, cameras followed the crew at work on their projects, and Mark took an active role in shaping how the story was being told. He met regularly with producers, helped to plan each episode's structure, and eventually became one of the show's producers himself. He wanted every shot to reflect their craftsmanship, the pride they take in their work. When the show aired, the response was overwhelming. Viewers loved it. What started as a small project quickly turned into something big. The production team, gobsmacked by the ratings, immediately ordered 13 more episodes. That was the beginning of what would become Barnwood Builders. In 2013, Johnny officially joined the cast, solidifying his spot in what would prove to be one of the most beloved crews to ever grace television. The show followed Mark, Johnny, Sherman Thompson, Graham Ferguson, Tim Rose, Max Hammer, and later Alex Webb as they traveled across the United States, salvaging and rebuilding antique barns and log cabins. But Barnwood Builders was about more than construction. It was about preserving history. The series tapped into something deeply nostalgic for many viewers: the pioneering spirit of early America. These were not just buildings, they were living pieces of history, and the crew treated them with the same reverence that archaeologists would give ancient artifacts. Each project had a story to be told, and the team made sure to find the history behind every site they worked on. They didn't just rebuild old structures, they brought them back to life. On their journeys, they met local craftsmen, blacksmiths, and woodworkers, and even sometimes lived history through reenactors. Every encounter added to their appreciation for the legacy they were preserving. That respect for history was what made the show stand out. It wasn't just about renovating homes. It was part documentary, part reality, and all about craftsmanship. You could see the care in every log they'd lift, every cabin they restored, and every detail they saved from time's decay. Under Mark Bose's leadership, his crew did not simply recycle old wood, but preserved authenticity. If a log could not be reused in one cabin, then it found new life as a replacement in another. It was all about homage to pioneers who first built these structures by hand long before power tools or modern machinery existed. Now, the very first Barnwood Builders episode